Hello, how are you doing? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'm going to be reacting to Eddie Jones's England squad. He named it this morning for the autumn internationals, which are coming up next month. In the video, I was actually at Twickenham Stadium earlier for the press briefing and for Eddie Jones's press conference after he announced the squad. Had a little bit of an issue with the audio in my intro, so I'm re-recording that. Now I'm at home, but in the actual video, I am at Twickenham Stadium. If you're new here, then please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and drop a comment down below. What do you make of the squad that Eddie Jones has selected? There's some interesting selections in there, also some interesting absentees as well, which is always the way. So let's get into it. Okay, so I am in, I guess, essentially the bowels of Twickenham Stadium. This behind me is actually what is the mix zone on match days, so any non-TV rights holders set up here after game and the England players get brought to them where they do their interviews. The tunnel is kind of just behind essentially where I'm sat, and then also the gym they use for warm-ups and things I had to walk through on my way here. So it's been awesome to be here today for that squad announcement. Let's get right into it. I think the headline, well, there's a few headlines. One of the main headlines is Kaden Murley has been called up for the first time, the Harlequins winger, who's been in superb form in the Premiership over the last 12 to 15 months, I would say. Try-scoring form, very, very good as well. But also his all-round game. He's quick, he's quite robust, he's fairly good in the air. I did a video a little while ago on this channel where I said I felt Kaden Murley deserved an England call-up, so I'm really glad to see that he's got one. I think it's an exciting pick. It'll be interesting to see how much game time he gets in that squad, but purely in terms of form, I think Kaden Murley deserves his call-up, and also he's a name for the future as well. He's still a young guy, he's still learning the game, so I think seeing how he adapts to an international setup is going to be very, very interesting. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole squad in this video because there's 36 players have been named. It would take absolutely ages and will probably get a little bit boring. So I'm going to pick out a few other interesting things that I think are in there that are worth mentioning. If we're talking about the wingers, Max Malins is back in, which is interesting because he kind of dropped out of the squad towards the back end of the Six Nations at the start of this year. He didn't tour Australia in the summer, but he's back in. And listening to what Eddie Jones has said about in terms of his selection, a lot of it is to do with how he's improved, the areas of his game that he's built upon, I suppose. We've always known that Max Malins is a really, really good try scorer. His try record in the Premiership is absolutely outstanding for Saracens and when he was on loan at Bristol as well. So it's perhaps more of the unseen work that he's gone away and improved upon, whether it be his positioning, his defence, work in the air, which is so key now in terms of the kicking game. So Max Malins back in, which I think is a very, very interesting selection. On the other hand, not selected, if we're looking at wingers, I think Anthony Watson is an interesting one. He's only just come back for Leicester Tigers, so I don't think that's a complete shock. He's been out for a long, long time with an injury. He's only just come back, perhaps not ready to make that jump up into the international games. So no Anthony Watson. I still think he has a future in this England squad going ahead to the World Cup, I would have thought, but maybe for now it's just a little bit too soon. I also wanted to stick with the backs for the time being. In particular, the centres, I think, is really, really fascinating. If we look at the players selected, I think most people would expect, if everyone's fit, it to be Marcus Smith at 10, Owen Farrell at 12, and Manu Tuolangi at 13. That probably makes sense based upon what we've seen and how England have set up in recent times when those players have been fit and healthy. Who there isn't in there, Henry Slade, I've seen mentioned quite a lot of times. He's not listed as unavailable either, so perhaps at this moment in time hasn't done enough to be selected. But because there's no Henry Slade, I look at the options that are there, and there's not as much cover, I think, in the centres as you would expect. So there's no Henry Slade, no Ollie Lawrence either, who was superb for Bath on the weekend. Now, of course, you don't get selected for England off the back of just one game, but even so, that's interesting. I wonder whether Ollie Lawrence might have got himself into the squad because of what he gives in terms of ball carrying and getting you over the game line, particularly with someone like Manu Tuolangi, whose injury record we all know about. If he was to drop out, Ollie Lawrence is the closest England have to Manu. You're never going to completely replace him. But in terms of that ball carrying, in terms of getting over the gain line, I'd have thought he might have been an option. Luke Northmore as well, who again is a Harlequins player who has been in absolutely superb form. He's been on the kind of fringes of getting into the England squad, but he's not selected either. And neither's Elliot Daly, who also not only can he play centre, but he can play wing, he can play fullback, would have given versatility, which can be really, really useful at international level. So I think it's fascinating, the centres. You look at the players that haven't been selected, and you look at Scott for Leicester Tigers, who has been named, who inexperienced guys, played very, very well for Leicester, and then Will Joseph as well. Inexperienced player, young player, really exciting, but hasn't got a lot of game time. I think it's one cap for England off the bench, and still, establishing himself in that London Irish team as well. What I have heard about Will Joseph is, in fact, I heard Alex Lowe talking about this on the Ruck podcast for the Times and the Sunday Times, was Will Joseph has really impressed during his time in England camp. So when he was on tour in Australia, even though he didn't play particularly, he only got the one cap, even though he didn't play loads, he really impressed behind the scenes. And also in the mini camp that England had a couple of weeks ago, or a week ago, or whatever it was, when Eddie Jones named that kind of preliminary squad, if you like, before his main squad he announced today, Will Joseph was part of that in that mini camp, and apparently really, really impressed. So I think he's a guy to keep an eye on that we're going to be seeing a lot more of in an England jersey going forward. So centres, fascinating. Perhaps for me, a few reservations if we do see an injury, or even if we say Marcus Smith goes off and Farrell shifts to 10, what happens with that centre combination and how England rejig that, I think could be really, really interesting. But let's wait and see. Moving on, only 2 tight heads in the squad. Now this is really cool. This is quite amusing almost. So there's only 2 tight heads in the squad. The third tight head would have been, I believe, Patrick Schickling of Exeter Chiefs, who's been part of the England squads before. He played for England against the Barbarians, now isn't part of the squad because there is a lot of confusion over the eligibility rules. The eligibility rules changed after 2018, they then changed again in 2020. So there was this feeling that if players came from overseas, they played in England, in the Premiership for long enough, they would be able to be selected. They're basically now not sure if that is actually still the case. So World Rugby, the RFU, Exeter Chiefs, everyone's basically trying to find out if Patrick Schickling can play for England. He's played against the Barbarians. It's lucky that that wasn't a capped game, because if he had played in a capped game, it would have been really quite embarrassing for the RFU. So no Patrick Schickling, just the 2 tight heads for England. And I mean, that's a bit of a farce really, but worth keeping an eye on in terms of those eligibility rules, and if we do get any clarity on that. Some final points just to mention, rather than going through individual players and things like that. Eddie Jones said in his broadcast part of his press conference that he said that they're missing about 30% of the squad that went to Australia. So there has been an element of changeover in the England squad. Part of that's injuries, part of it is selection as well. But I think if you look overall at this England squad, we can always debate individual positions. Should Henry Slade be there? Should Mitchell be there as a scrum half? He's the name that always gets mentioned, particularly Saints fans want to see him more. So we can debate those positions, but overall I think it's a good England squad. I think it's got a nice mix of experience and younger players coming through as well, and ultimately it is a squad which is building towards that World Cup. Eddie Jones has said that he feels more certain of his squad heading into the World Cup than he did at this stage before 2019. About a year out from 2019, a year to go in 2018, he wasn't as sure of his squad as he is going into the World Cup next year, which is very, very interesting and does bode well for England and makes it fascinating to see how they're going to get on in the autumn internationals coming up that next month. They got Argentina, Japan, New Zealand and South Africa. So 2 of the group games, 2 of the quote-unquote easier sides you would expect to start, and then they're building towards what was the semi-final and final in 2019. Very deliberate how England have structured this autumn, I believe. I'll leave it there. There's so much more I could get into, but that's just some of my thoughts on the squad that was named today at Twickenham. Remember, if you're new here, subscribe to the channel, like the video. Most importantly though, drop a comment down below. What do you make of England's squad for the autumn internationals? All right, I'll see you in the next one.